Hello and welcome to my art channel. This video is going to be a Q&A. Thanks so much to Squarespace for sponsoring my channel as usual. And in this video, I'm just going to be answering some questions from you guys from a couple of videos ago. And if you're new here, I am an illustrator and comic artist, and my comic series is called Gloaming Veil, which you can read for free at gloamingveil.com. So please check that out and let's go. Q&A time! Unfortunately, my second go at recording this audio, because the first time, after literally 50 minutes, like almost an hour of recording and being finished, I found out that actually my microphone was off and my CINTIQ was recording, which makes me really wonder, like, why does the CINTIQ even have a microphone at all? Like, what function could it possibly serve? Because let me tell you, the voice quality was absolute trash, and even though I tried so hard to try to run it like through some filters, reduce the noise and whatnot, it was still just unlistenable. So I had to take a day to get over the tragedy and just do it again this morning. So here we are. All right, so for the questions, a couple of videos ago, I told you guys that I'm going to be doing another Q&A video because I haven't done one in quite some time. And so I just took all the questions from that video's comment section and I sorted them out into like vague groups. I grouped them and kind of put the ones that I found more interesting first and left the more common questions, like less specific and more like art related or whatever, near the end. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to get through all of them, but essentially I'm just gonna go through all the questions and basically answer them, probably pretty long format. So this is one of those videos where we can just hang out. It's gonna be very calm and relaxing, and so you can get out your sketchbook, maybe grab a cup of coffee or tea and join me on this long format video. So let's get started. The first question is, what do you find is the weakest link in your process when it comes to the comic, and do you think it's more important to address these or focus more on your strengths? So I thought this was a really good question because it's actually not something that I think about all that much. And so it forced me to really reevaluate my process, kind of go over it in my head and figure out where I thought the weakest links actually were. And I don't know if this is presumptuous of me or I'm just short-sighted when it comes to assessing my work at the moment, but I honestly think my weakest link is my ability to schedule tasks, stay on task, and just getting things done in a timely manner. So essentially hitting deadlines, or I should say hitting self-imposed deadlines, is my biggest problem. Like, I find it very, very challenging to stay consistently productive through whatever things happen outside of my typical work schedule. Like, honestly, I could probably stand to improve a lot in this, and I do think it's probably the biggest concern that I can think of when it comes to my comic creation process. So I think, yes, it's absolutely the most important thing to address this rather than focus on my strengths, because I can't focus on my strengths if I'm not doing the work as often as I'd like to be. And I know, like, honestly, this has been a problem for me for many years, just basically as long as I can remember. I will say I've definitely gotten a lot better at scheduling things and getting things done over the years, but I still find it extremely difficult to stick to self-imposed deadlines when they're not tied to any specific event or timeline that doesn't have anything to do with me only. So for instance, like, I have a better track record when it comes to meeting deadlines for certain things, like for a convention or I don't know, it's just any number of deadlines. I'm actually very good with deadlines when it comes to client work. Like, I'm not one of those unreliable artists that'll just kind of disappear and you won't hear from until you have to prod or whatever. I'm very good with deadlines that I get for client work. But when it comes to my own deadlines, I think the biggest problem for me is juggling things. And I'm sure I've spoken about this so many times before where, yeah, I always just find myself in the cycle of darting back and forth between projects that I have voluntarily committed to that are all kind of self-imposed. And I think because of this, it just really derails the scheduling for things that don't have any sort of external deadlines, I guess. So as you guys probably know, I have sponsorship contract with Squarespace, and I do have quite a hard time most months to meet the deadlines, even though I always do find the time and make the videos by the end of the month. I really want to make them faster so that they don't have to be posted near the end of the month as what it ends up being. And unfortunately, just the indecisiveness of what the video is going to be and like what would make better content, and just there's a lot of things that end up stacking and make me take forever on actually completing the task. Like, for instance, even for this one, took me a while to get the footage, and I was holding, it's funny because I've had this specific footage that I'm using for quite some time, but I just was for some reason feeling like I needed something better, like something more, like a better, more polished illustration. And honestly, this is seriously the pattern that I found. Like, I'll have some, like, I won't have enough time to make a complete illustration for anything else because I'm busy doing something else. Like, for instance, for this month, I was really focused on completing the thumbnails for Gloaming Bell chapter 1, and so that is content that I can't post right now. It's something I can't share, and I was really excited to just jump right into production for chapter 1, which I kind of have in some ways, but in any case. And then I'm just like, okay, I have these 2 videos that I have to make, and I had this footage ready to go a little while ago from just a warm-up session prior to one of these thumbnailing sessions, and at the time, I was like, yeah, this is fine, I'm going to use this. But then later as time went on, I thought that, oh, like, what if this is just kind of boring? Like, what if you guys don't really like seeing this type of rough, random sketchbook stuff? Like, maybe I should do something better, like a finished illustration, because people like those better. And then it just totally derails my month. So this is actually a pretty good opportunity for me to remind myself that the YouTube channel content is not my priority. My priority has to be the comic, because unless it's the comic, it's never gonna reach the production scheduling that I wanted to, because I will always end up superseding it with something else that I just in a panic-stricken way decide is more important in the moment. And you know what? That's essentially how the delays keep happening. It's always because something comes up, and in like a panic mode, I decide to prioritize this other thing, and that's just how it goes. But while I'm on the topic of Gloaming Bell, let me just tell you about today's sponsor, which is, of course, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence for your business. I myself have been using Squarespace for my main portfolio website for years, and naturally when I was looking for places to host my original webcomic, Squarespace was my top contender, but I wasn't sure how things were going to go because typically webcomics are hosted using blog-style websites, and there's been some complicated coding from what I've heard, but I'm super happy to report that Squarespace was very easy. It was a total breeze. The freeform editor allowed me to create the landing page exactly how I wanted to, with custom button images and a parallax background and a logo as large as I want, which is very large, as you can see. So the backhand is very straightforward. Editing and posting new pages is super easy, and the fantastic thing is that I can always add a custom shop directly to the site in the future if I need to. I highly recommend using Squarespace. If you want to try it out for yourself and make a website portfolio or host your webcomic or anything, you can head over to squarespace.com and sign up for a free trial so you can test out all the amazing features. Once you're ready to launch your website, you can go to squarespace.com/cosmicspectrumart for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. That's squarespace.com/cosmicspectrumart for 10% off. Yeah, so there we go. That was like a good little bit of information for me to digest and hopefully retain. So yeah, that was a long answer to a question, and I don't even know if what I spoke about, I guess it's not directly related to the comic because I didn't talk about actual comic making process, weak links, which when I think about it, I think because I'm pretty, like, I haven't put out too much of the actual comic yet, I think those weak links just have not been revealed yet. So I think I'll probably notice things I could seriously improve on as the production progresses. But at the moment, honestly, I'm in a position where I just have to do it, and while I'm working, of course things are difficult, but I can't really tell you any specific weak link when it comes to drawing and planning and thumbnailing, whatever. I find it all pretty equal across the board. So yes. And now moving on to the next question. When you were writing Gloaming Veil, did you go from the big picture to breaking it down to smaller scenes, or the opposite? If first, how did you start working on smaller scenes? So I definitely went from smaller scenes into the big picture over a very long period of time. I believe I actually made a video several months ago with the topic of writing comics, and there I go in quite a bit of detail about my process to how I landed where I am currently. And yeah, it was definitely scene first, and then the big picture just kind of emerged. So this person included a note in the question that says, I am currently working on my story, and I sort of have the plot as a big picture figured out, but I struggle with going into details, even though I'm a very detail-oriented person, so I wanted to ask your experience. So maybe I'll try to give some advice in terms of this, even though that's not the experience I had. Once I did actually come up with the overarching plot, like a big picture sort of situation, that doesn't necessarily mean I have all the scenes figured out, like actually pretty far from it. I will occasionally have a scene vividly pop into my head, and it's something that definitely fits into the overarching plot, but that's mostly because the overarching plot is relatively vague. So when I say overarching plot, for me, I have a vague I'm sorry, what is I don't remember what the terminology is for the three arc storyline or something. No. Okay, hold on. I'm just gonna actually look this up and figure out what I'm talking about. Okay. The term I was looking for was 3-act structure. So maybe it is something like that, but I think it's kind of a reductive term. So I think within the three did I just seriously forget it again? 3-act structure. Okay, so when it comes to the big picture, I sort of vaguely utilize the 3-act structure, but I think it can probably be broken down into many smaller parts of the story that could also be broken down into a 3-act structure. So it's not super detailed at the moment. What I really have is just certain things, like certain situations to work towards. So I vaguely know where I want the story to, like how I want the story to end, and certain points where characters have to get to a scenario where character A and character B are now working towards a common goal, and then eventually, like, that's a very loose example, like that's not exactly, but you know what I mean. So once I know where I want these things to happen, the filling out what happens to get them from point A to point B tends to just kind of work itself out while I'm actually writing chapters in point form. And I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it does sort of make itself up as I go. So I would say that's probably my general approach. There are certain scenes that I do know I want to include, and I will work towards those and write them in. But a lot of my decisions are also practical. Like, for instance, if I'm working towards something important, like an important event that marks it's just like, I guess, something that is an inciting incident, but it doesn't happen at the very beginning of the story. So my general logic for figuring out what is going to happen leading up to it is, what information does the reader need to know in order for this revelation to mean something and to have some sort of impact. So obviously the impact has to be on the characters, and it has to be clear as to why there is an impact on the characters from this thing happening. So in order for that to be properly communicated, I need every character's basic situation, first of all, to be known to the reader. And so I have to figure out a way to introduce each character quickly, but in a way that basically communicates a bunch of information about what's going on with them. And this is not something that I go clinical on. Like, I don't calculate exactly like how to figure this out. It sort of starts to come together at that point. And I don't know, I feel like I've been blessed to be able to intertwine things in a way where I found that I was able to communicate a lot of information in a pretty short amount of story, while still having things happening, and it not being like some sort of separate situation where you just introduce one character per chapter or something and then just like follow them for a day, which is kind of what I did initially in Id Fracture. Like, I had chapters that are sort of dedicated to one character, and then you would just kind of walk through a couple of situations with the character only from their perspective. Anyways, I know it's a little bit difficult to talk about this, especially to those of you who haven't read Id Fracture, but it was quite chaotic, obviously, and which is why I decided to rewrite it. So for this time, I'm actually putting a lot more thought into how I structure things. And yeah, I guess the structure more or less is about disseminating the information that's necessary for the next plot point to have any sort of impact. So I guess that's the basic way that I approach writing a script. And the way that I explained it just now maybe sounds a little bit clinical, but like I said, it's actually more organic than it sounds, because it tends to just fall into place. And it tends to fall into place because I have every character's arc already planned out. Well, not exactly, not every single character, but at least like the main characters. And for the most part, I don't know exactly where their arcs will intersect, but that is definitely just solving itself as I go along, because certain moments just come up where it definitely makes sense for character arcs to intersect, and they definitely play off against one another, which is great, so I don't have to plan too much when it comes to that. And as I go along, also, definitely I've been experiencing things where characters that are kind of secondary have an arc that just emerges clear as day for me as I figure out the other stuff that happens. So they get slightly promoted from totally background character to a somewhat important person, but not the main character, obviously. So yeah, that was non-specific, but for the sake of avoiding spoilers, I do have to talk about it in that way. And I think that answers the question, so I'm just gonna move on to the next one. So the next question is, I know you have had your story in your head for a long time. I wonder how you didn't get bored of it, bored of it all by the time you got to actually work on it. So that's an excellent question, I think, given the fact that I've been working on the story for 15 years, give or take. And yeah, I think the biggest reason why I didn't get bored of it is probably because it has changed so much over the years. And the changes that took place generally corresponded with whatever new insights I gathered just from my own life. And I would actually say that even though I do lament not having started earlier or having taken like this long to finally get to it, at the same time, I do feel like I probably could not have written it earlier even if I tried. So on that note, I will explain why I think that. And also, there was a follow-up to this question, which is, when and how did you know that your story is worth your time to make it a reality and share it with people? So I thought this was a really good question, because it's definitely not something it's definitely something that still comes to mind sometimes, that I think about at length. And I think, first of all, I decided that it was a worthwhile pursuit a while ago, not too long ago. For a while, the project was just like something that I've always dreamed about doing, is, making a comic or whatever, and that being my occupation. That didn't have a whole lot of substance. It was just something that I wanted to do since I was a kid, and I didn't really know why. It just appealed for whatever reason. And so I tried to do that in the background of my, or actually it was the opposite. I kind of structured my life around it in a lot of ways. But anyways, so eventually I came to a point where I thought about it with much more depth, and that point probably came like several years ago when I was at a crossroads. And also it came about when I was finally able to make serious progress with actually writing the story. So one of the things that kept me, for at least 5 or 6 years, the thing that kept me from starting the comic or really making any substantial progress with it is because I honestly just couldn't come up with a plot. So my biggest problem was that I did not have a plot to the story, and all I had was these characters that I really loved and just their basic circumstances, but there was really nothing going on, if that makes any sense, in the story. So I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to tell it properly, and at that point, absolutely, it did not feel like something worth telling, because I didn't have anything that I felt like was worth telling. It was just my little fantasy world of escapism that I relied on to just kind of bear through my life, which I wasn't very happy with. And that's all it was for a very long time. And probably for the best at that point. Yeah, I never got around to starting anything. I never got around to putting too much time into it, because there were just a lot of other things going on. I had some full-time occupations, and I was struggling in a lot of different ways. And like I mentioned, that was probably for the best, because later on, once I was able to solve a lot of my life problems that were plaguing me for a very long time, is when I finally felt like, well, actually, it wasn't so that I felt like I could finally write a story, but when I would sit down, I actually suddenly knew where I wanted character arcs to go. So I actually have a lot of sad sack like diary entries from back in those days when I would just get so frustrated, and I would vent about how all I have is questions and I don't have any solutions for the story. Like, I can come up with a bunch of questions and a bunch of problems that the characters have, but I have absolutely zero solutions to those problems. So the story just felt like these people that struggle with their problems, and they just kind of stew in their misery and it doesn't go anywhere. You know what I mean? And yeah, of course that didn't feel like something that was particularly worthwhile. Like, it was worthwhile for me because it was a good escape, but yeah. In any case, moving on. So after I managed to actually solve some problems, some personal problems in my life, and I found like solid, coherent solutions that I could articulate in my head that were very clear, like unmistakably so. It's not like I just kind of stumbled into success or stumbled into finally being happy. It was all mental work, and it was a lot of mental work, and it took a pretty long time. And because I was so involved with it on my own time, I knew kind of exactly how I got there. So I'm like, okay, I literally have solutions to these problems that have been plaguing me. And obviously the problems that plague my characters were not the same exactly, but I would probably categorize them under similar, like under the same umbrella of general life problems. So yeah, once I got to a point where I felt like these are problems that I thought, at least to the best of my knowledge, I could solve. I also thought that it's not as idiosyncratic as some people would think. Like, a lot of solutions to life problems actually could be prescribed to most people, at least that's my opinion. And so in that regard, I thought that perhaps I could finally make some meaning out of the story, because it will no longer just be a purely self-indulgent exercise in escapism from reality, and I could actually maybe offer some helpful solutions to people who are struggling. But that's not like my number one intention. That just adds a layer of meaning to make the pursuit feel worthwhile. It doesn't mean that I want to preach to people on how to like solve their life problems. That's not at all what I want to do. And I still, like, I think the biggest thing that's kept me interested also is because I really love my characters. They feel so real to me, and I really care for them in a way that I want to write the story in a way that turns out well for them eventually, and so that has kept me going through all the years. And obviously these epiphanies that I've had did not come all in one, like all at the same time. It was a very long process, and as this process continued, so did the story change with it. And essentially the basic structure of the story and where I wanted to go and what I wanted to be about in the grand scheme of things definitely emerged as I was engaged with this in my own personal life. So that's how I was able to keep interested in it for so long, and that is pretty much how I decided that it is definitely worth my time. And there's another thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to deciding that something is a worthwhile pursuit, because let's be real, like, making comics is not a joke. It takes a ton of time, and as far as the industry goes, it's like one of the probably least paid, the most effort involved type of jobs. So I never loved comics in a way where it was just, oh, this is what I want to do regardless of what it is. I just want to draw comics. And so I never actually went out of my way to seek a comic related job, but because one came up several years ago, I took it, and I have like some limited experience of what that's like, and it's totally thankless, and quite frankly, it sucks. Like, I would never advise somebody to work in comics, because personally, I don't think that's a worthwhile way to spend your time, especially if you're working on stuff that has no personal significance to you. So there's that. The reason why I decided that making a comic for myself and writing it myself is a worthwhile pursuit is because of all the things that I already mentioned, but also specifically to my case. Like, I always wanted to tell stories, but it's something that I wasn't super aware of until way later in life. And so now I can comfortably accept the fact that I think being a writer is one of the things that I want to be. But, having said that, it begs the question of why don't I just write books and make the cover art and maybe insert some illustrations, because that's probably a more effective use of time, because drawing comics is just such grueling work and it takes so much time, and people, I don't know, basically the production is quite slow, especially if you do it by yourself, for the most part, the way that I do. And the reason why I don't want to go the write the book and draw some illustrations route is because it kind of takes me back to the first questions a little bit about weaknesses and strengths. So I know that making images is a strength for sure, and drawing characters is a strength, especially their facial expressions. And I think that stuff is so important to create an emotional impact. And so that's one reason. The second reason is that I honestly don't think I have any talent for writing in a poetic way, like being good at prose. That's something that I would definitely have to learn and work very hard to get good at. Being a poet is maybe something you can learn. I think some people are naturally gifted at writing. I don't think I am by any stretch of the imagination, and that's just a skill that I don't think there's any use in me trying to learn, because I am already better at conveying an emotion and a mood with images. And for that reason, I think the highest and best use of my time and my talents is making a comic and writing a story. So I hope that makes sense. So that's kind of the logic that took me to the place where I accepted that this is the thing that I should do. And I don't know, I believe a lot of stuff that maybe not everybody believes. Like, for instance, I think that if I decide in a very honest and straightforward way that this is my best attempt at doing what I think is for the highest good, then I think that it will work out in one way or another. Like, I don't know exactly how it's gonna work out, but I just have faith that it will, and that's what propels me to keep going. And for the most part, that's that would probably be a good place to end that question. So hopefully that made sense. Yes, I will. Okay, next question. I was wondering how/where you find your inspiration about in regards to Gloaming Veil. And a follow-up question, I was wondering if you have a process to plan out your story. And a note on this question: I decided that I finally want to try and make a webcomic, however, I'm having trouble planning the story alongside the art. Okay, so the question about inspiration, I think I talked at length about the story and how I approach writing it and whatnot. So, if I had anything to add to that as far as inspiration goes, it's probably just the topics that I'm generally interested in, such as probably like psychology was the first one, and then that bled into sociology and philosophy, inevitably religion and history. Those are all things that I'm very interested in, and I think they kind of really do inspire me a lot, actually. And aside from that, music I think is one of the biggest ones for sure. So sometimes when I have a long commute and I listen to music that I really like, it really does pop scenes into my head, seemingly out of nowhere. And a lot of those scenes did eventually make it as like these important plot points that I'm writing the story around, that help me kind of guide to where it's going. I don't know what is going on outside the window right now, but there seems to be a lot of sirens, so apologies for that. I'm just gonna wait for this one to pass. Okay. The second part of this question was the person asking for advice in terms of having trouble planning the story alongside the art. So like I mentioned before, there is a video where I talk about this stuff at length, but to keep it concise, I would advise to focus on the characters, because that's what I do. My general approach is to focus mostly on the characters and decide what I want their story arcs to be, and then I just kind of let things fall into place as their story arcs intertwine. And it obviously, I think this would be easier and faster if you have less characters to contend with. Like if you have mostly one main character or a couple of main characters, then that would probably be faster. But yeah, it's kind of a difficult question to answer, but you should know what you want to make a comic about. If you don't know, then you don't really have a story, I suppose. So maybe come up with something that you would want to draw, just things you're interested in, things you find visually appealing that you would enjoy drawing, stuff like that is a good place to start. And if you already have characters, then yeah, like I mentioned, just plot out their character arc and just make the story about that. That's basically what a story is, I think. All right, moving on to the next question. How do you go about making people care about your original characters, especially in a time where it seems impossible to get anyone to notice your artwork unless it is fandom related? I thought this was a very good question, because this is something that I struggled with a lot over the years and still kind of do sometimes. I would say, as far as advice is concerned, I don't think it's such a bad idea to utilize the popularity of fan art to get eyeballs on your art. Like, it's definitely something that I have done many times in my journey through social media and whatnot. I think the trick is just not to lean anywhere that is unauthentic to you. So if I've ever done any fan art, it's always been of things that I genuinely really love and I had a blast drawing. And for that reason, I think the fan art ended up very much resonating with people that are also fans of the thing. And it definitely helped boost my numbers for sure, because as far as like the power of recognition, like anything familiar, yeah, people love fan art, and sometimes I do too. Overall, I would say if you really like something genuinely and it happens to be popular at the moment, just make some fan art. Why not? And post it and see how it does. Might help to get some attention on your art. But I would say definitely, if your goal is to make people care about your original characters, just draw your original characters a lot. I think personally, I mean, at least I'd like to think that, because I really do love my characters so much, that this is something that really resonates from my artwork. And I think for the most part, you can just kind of feel that type of thing. And I think a lot of people do feel it when they look at my art. And like I said, I'd like to think so anyways. And I feel super blessed that there are people that seem to care about my characters, at least in a sense that they're very interested to learn about their stories. And I think to some degree, also having had the webcomic in the past, I think also probably got a lot of people, well, a fair amount of people interested in the story all those years ago. And I honestly, I don't even understand why a lot of people are still interested, but it seems to be the case. And I feel so immensely grateful for that, because I don't know, I think as far as the most blessed feelings I've ever felt in this life, definitely probably at number one or close to the top would be just the proof, or any sort of comment that suggests that somebody also has some sort of personal connection or affinity for one of my characters. That's got to be the best feeling that I've ever felt in my life, because it makes me feel like I was able to really connect with someone, and yeah, I think it's a mirror of the same types of some of the best experiences I've ever had in my life were just reading certain books that really resonate with me. And that feeling of being connected to another person from another time that I feel really could understand what I feel, and it just made me feel more connected to humanity as a whole, and it made me feel a little bit more like I had a place in this world. You know what I mean? It's a very tangential sort of topic, but I think that's really something that I'm aiming for when it comes to writing my story. So yeah, hopefully that's one of the things that help people care about my original characters. At least I can only hope that they do. But yeah, again, back to the fan art. Like I said, it's not such a bad idea to utilize the popularity of fan art now and then. But overall, I think that if you really care about your work and you put in the time to make compelling art, I think you will find your audience. And I do think that actually in recent years, I think it's a little bit easier for newer, smaller accounts to grow and to reach an audience than it used to be back in the day. So it's not a bad time. Like, it's never a bad time to start doing that, for sure, in my opinion. Okay, next question. How do you approach coloring in your comic? I really love the sort of rich, vintage, moody tones and atmosphere in your panels and artworks. How do you decide the vibe of the scene and the colors? First of all, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. I definitely put a lot of effort into the atmosphere, into the backgrounds, and just like the panels in general. As far as how I approach coloring it is, I think I like to look at photos a lot for mood. So before or while I'm working on a chapter, or I guess I do this in the thumbnailing process. So I'll read over the chapter script and I will take every scene, into consideration. And I typically open a board of references where I can just like drop things in and stack them. The specific app that I use for this is a desktop app called PureRef. I think I have a link in it in my description. But yeah, so I will start this mood board and I will drop all the references I need for this for the whole chapter into this board. I love the freeform format. Like back in the day when I was working on Grimoire Noir, I just had one Pinterest board that was in, obviously it's in chronological order. Like when you find the pin is when it will show up. And, sorting those boards is a little bit of a pain, honestly. I don't like Pinterest that much. First of all, clicking on any single image is the potential disastrous outcome of you doom scrolling forever, because it'll always show you some pretty images that you would want to click on. So for that reason, I don't know, I try to be very careful with Pinterest, because honestly, it really does impede my workflow quite a bit, but it is necessary and I do still use it a fair amount of time. But yeah, I like to take my references out of Pinterest and onto this board that I will later reference when I'm working on the chapter, and so I don't have to go outside of it and get distracted by all this other crap that comes up on Pinterest. And for the most part, like in terms of colors, I have definitely read about basic color theory and what colors like invoke certain emotions, and honestly, I don't think that's something you really need to study. I think it's something that's very innate to people. You can probably just kind of deduce what kind of colors create a certain mood. It's something you can just feel, and also you can feel it out while testing out panels. So I do like to test out panels now and then. I don't do this too often, but sometimes for a color scheme, just making a quick test is helpful. But also, one of my golden rules personally is that I like to keep color palettes very limited. So this is one of the things actually I absolutely detest about comics, American comics that are colored, is just a cacophony of different colors for every single page and every panel. I think it just does such a disservice to the mood. And so certain comics that are way more conservative when it comes to the color palette actually make a much stronger impression, at least to me, from everything that I've read. Specifically, I think some Batman comics tend to be on the better end of this. But yeah, like I said, I've seen a lot of comics where like the art can be incredible, especially the line work and whatnot, and then it'll just get, in my opinion, absolutely ruined by like a bright, ridiculous color scheme that doesn't really correspond with the mood. Then again, I will take this with a grain of salt. I don't have a whole lot of experience with Western comics because I don't read them. If I ever buy anything, it's because I really like the artist, usually for the line work, the ink, and, competitions and whatnot. Never really for the colors. I'm sure there are probably comics out there that are very good with that. But anyways, I brought this up because just wanted to point out that I never reference comics for color. I always look for screenshots from movies for the most part, and just moody photos done by photographers that are very aware of the atmosphere, and so the photos are usually pretty heavily edited, which is totally fine because it really helps to exaggerate and make the mood clearer. So I bring that up because I personally do not take my own photos when it comes to atmospheric references, like for colors and whatnot, because in reality I think it's pretty tough to just be able to you have to have a really good eye to take photos and do very little editing and to make something look super cohesive. I think just walking around on a day-to-day basis, like, things do tend to look rather dull. And so personally, like, sometimes I even just love walking around with with strongly tinted sunglasses, because it makes everything look so gorgeous and moody. So, like I said, big fan of limited color schemes. Just picking one dominant color usually helps a lot. And I think one of the things that I do tend to, or try to pay attention to, is integrating characters into the background so they don't look too separate from it. That's another thing that sometimes bugs me about animation, actually, or comics, is that characters can really just pop against the background sometimes, and it makes it feel more cartoonish and disembodied, which, whatever. Cartoonish sometimes works for the story. For me, I think I'm very much trying to grasp some sort of mood most of the time, so for that reason it works in my favor to try and integrate the characters into the background more and just try to utilize backgrounds more in general. I know it creates extra work, but I do think it's somewhat worthwhile, because then the panel to panel reads more like a storyboard for a movie rather than just a comic with a bunch of abstractions. So anyways, yes, hopefully that answers the question about the atmosphere and panels. Yes, and there was a follow-up question to that. I think this was asked by a different person, but it's the same topic. So the question is, how do you develop your iconic color palettes? First of all, thank you very much for saying that and thinking that about my artwork. So yeah, again, like I said, I think for the most part it's quite simple. It just comes down to going with a very limited color palette and having a dominant color, and that's just how I tend to approach my colored artworks. And I will say, like, I think I came a long way when it comes to colors. There are certain things that came very natural to me, which was always line work. I've never struggled with line work, and I never had to work to improve it very hard, which, not to brag or anything, it's just, I don't know, I got lucky. That's a genetic thing, I'm pretty sure, because it's the same with my dad and the same with my brother, so there's something going on there. But colors, not so much. And basically everything else was a struggle to learn. Anatomy, like, I don't know, getting better at shape design, coloring, all the composition, all the other things I did really have to study and learn. And so for colors in particular, yes, it really helped to look at stills from just critically acclaimed movies with a really famously excellent cinematography. Those things help a lot for composition and color. And yeah, just being able to organize colors, not to have like a random selection of bright colors that are all clashing, and just being able to group things, organize things, really make use of lighting, and yeah, having a limited color palette. Those are the things that I tend to utilize the most. So yes, moving on to the next question. How do you deal with the constant pressure that you have to perform at your best and expectations of your audience? So I thought this was a really good question that probably is tough for a lot of people to deal with, as it is for me in some ways. So as far as my art goes, I definitely don't struggle with expectations of my audience, because I've really trained myself over the years to have, high enough standards that don't make me miserable about my art all the time, but that help me improve from year to year and to just aim higher in general. But I do think I've reached a comfort point where my art doesn't make me sick quite some time ago. And so, like, it's not that I'm very comfortable where I am, but for the most part, I think my own standards are high enough, and I think I upkeep them and assess my art often enough that I really don't think ever about how other people perceive it. That's just something that I don't really think about, because I do think I have very high expectations of myself, and I think slowly I am managing to move towards them, and that is perfectly good enough for me. As far as other pressures and audience expectations, I definitely struggle with that when it comes to just the amount of posting and activity that I do on social media and my YouTube mostly. Okay, so for the amount of stuff I post and how frequently I post things, I totally understand that most people just don't care. And that's actually the point of fear when it comes to that. I am afraid that if I take things too easy and I don't post often enough, that people will just forget. Like, they will forget about my art and whatever, and just, when you forget about something, that's it. It's gone from your mind. And then the trouble is that next time I do post, because of this lack of activity, most people just won't see my posts, and so they will never get reminded. And that is how I will slowly just slip into irrelevance. And that's my fear. You know what I mean? Like, because at the end of the day, as much as I, in some ways making art is self-indulgent, I still really care about sharing it with people. And I know that some people do want to see my project when it does, update, and when I post new pages and when it's underway. And a lot of those people probably won't even know about it because of how the algorithm works, unfortunately. And that does upset me to some degree, but I try not to linger on it because there's just nothing I can do, and I'm not a machine. Like, I can't just revolve my life around making posts on social media. So I really have to temper that and, like, kind of try not to think about it too much. And yeah, my biggest my biggest anxiety as far as, like, the quality of my content is probably actually on YouTube specifically, because like I told you guys earlier in this video, sometimes it really gets in my head. Like, I get super worried about perhaps, like, what I'm posting is boring, or I need to make a finished illustration, even though that really does not go into my schedule whatsoever. And yeah, that messes with me literally on a month-to-month basis, but I'm gonna try not to think about it, because in the end, what ends up happening is that I just tell myself aggressively to relax and to just stop worrying about it and just use what I have and fulfill my obligation to post a video, but just focus on talking what I want to talk about and, like, answering questions, which is the part that I actually do find enjoyable, and just post it and hope for the best. So this is kind of the strategy that I'm trying to employ more often, but it still trips me up, like, every month, I swear. Like, I gotta get better at this. Anyways, so yes, those are, I'm like about halfway or a little over halfway through the questions, and since the video is almost an hour long at this point, I think it's a good time to just make it stop and probably do another Q&A video with the rest of the questions in the future. So if you're still listening, thank you so much for throwing this video on in the background. I hope I was able to keep you company, and please let me know whatever question might have popped into your head in the comments, and I will definitely include it in the next Q&A session. And again, thank you, and I will see you in the next one. All right, bye.